They say success is the best revenge, but no one tells you what to do when success becomes the very reason they try to bury you. My name is Rachel Linford. I am 38 years old, born and raised in Portland, Oregon, and I spent the last 7 years climbing the brutal ladder of corporate tech life at a company called Valvera Tech. I was the director of strategic platforms, which in plain terms meant I took on every impossible project no one else would touch. I solved problems before they became lawsuits, and I turned chaos into profit. I loved what I did, until I realized just how disposable loyalty makes you. 3 months ago, I brought in the largest deal our company had ever seen, $600 million. It was a groundbreaking partnership with a European telecom giant that had been 3 years in the making. I flew back and forth across the Atlantic, negotiated under pressure, worked through illness and exhaustion. While others were taking long weekends, I was stitching this agreement together line by line, clause by clause. I had not seen my family in 2 holidays. I missed my best friend's wedding. I poured everything into this deal because I thought it would define my legacy at Valvera Tech. I was right, but not in the way I expected. The company was buzzing with anticipation. This deal would be the face of our annual gala. Rumors flew about who would receive the Innovator of the Year award, but everyone knew it was going to be me. My team congratulated me in advance. The CEO gave me a wink in the hallway. HR even requested a short speech from me for the event. I remember feeling proud, tired but proud. I thought I had finally made it to a place of security. And then came Thursday, 2 days before the gala. I stayed late to finish some compliance paperwork in the executive suite, and as I walked past the glass wall of conference room D, I heard voices. I froze when I recognized them. Elliot Wade, our chief strategy officer, a man I had once respected, and Marissa Clay, the newly promoted vice president of talent, known for her cold ambition and perfectly rehearsed smiles. I heard Elliot say, in that smug, too confident tone of his, "We give her the award, then we let her go. She is too powerful now, too loud, too respected." At first I thought I had misheard. It was late. Maybe I was imagining things. I leaned closer. Marissa responded, without even a whisper of hesitation, "It is time. She has outgrown the leash. We need to replace her before she realizes just how much leverage she has." I stood there, hidden by the corner, my heart thudding in my ears. I was not angry at first. I was stunned. Not even heartbroken. Just hollow. These were people I had worked beside for years. People I had gone out of my way to support. I had pushed Marissa's promotion when others called her inexperienced. I had covered for Elliot when one of his botched product forecasts nearly tanked a smaller deal. And this was their gratitude. I walked to my car that night in silence. No tears, no outbursts. Just a dangerous kind of calm. The kind of calm that comes when the illusion finally breaks. I sat behind the wheel and stared at the empty parking lot thinking, they really believe they can use me as a trophy, then toss me out like a paper cup. It was almost laughable. I gave them the biggest win in company history, and their plan was to parade me around, applaud politely, then cut the cord behind closed doors. That was the moment something inside me snapped into focus. I knew I could not stop them from firing me, but I could make damn sure they would never profit from my work again. If they wanted a show, I would give them one. But they would not be the ones writing the ending. So I put on my best smile at the office the next day. I continued responding to emails, attending meetings, and drafting reports like everything was fine. But quietly in the background, I began building something they could not touch, something I would control, something they would one day beg to understand. I did not storm into anyone's office or demand an explanation. I did not send angry emails or try to call them out. I knew better than that. In a place like Valvera Tech, once they decide you are a threat, any sign of resistance only proves their point. They were going to push me out no matter what I did. But what they did not know was that I had already started preparing for something bigger. I was not just going to walk away quietly. I was going to make sure they could never use what I built without me. For the past year, I had been developing a system behind the scenes, a predictive artificial intelligence tool that could simulate and optimize infrastructure projects before a single dollar was spent. It was fast, smart, and incredibly valuable. It was the core reason we had landed that $600 million contract. But I had been careful. I built the most critical layers of the system on my own time, using my personal machine, separate from the company's servers. I called it Project Halcyon. And now I moved everything, code, data models, architecture plans, into a private cloud environment that only I could access. No backups, no copies, nothing that Valvera Tech could claim. But protecting the system was only one part of it. The real move, the one that would seal their fate, was the contract. The European telecom deal had not been fully finalized. A few technical details were still pending, which gave me a window. Using a private legal advisor I trusted, I quietly introduced an amendment to the terms. The change was buried in legal language, but it was clear. The platform would require my direct oversight, not as a preference, but as a legal obligation. If I was removed from the project, the contract would be void. It was subtle enough to go unnoticed, but strong enough to stand in court, and most importantly, it would hold. I remember feeling oddly calm while doing it. Not excited, not scared, just focused. Every late night I had spent building that system, every ounce of energy I had poured into that deal. It all led to this moment. They thought they owned me. They thought they could dress me up, smile for the cameras, and then erase me from the picture like I had never existed. But they had forgotten something. I was the architect of everything they were celebrating. And architects never leave without blueprints. At the office, I kept up appearances. I laughed at the right jokes, nodded in meetings, and continued to deliver updates like nothing had changed. But underneath the surface, I was preparing for war. A quiet, deliberate, calculated war. I checked access logs, reviewed security permissions, and made sure my machine never touched the internal network with any trace of Halcyon. I even left behind a basic version of the tool on their servers. A shell that looked convincing, but lacked the real intelligence that made it valuable. It would fool them for a while. There was a moment, late one night, when I sat alone in my apartment staring at my laptop screen. I had just completed the final encryption layer on the cloud environment. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, the kind of breath you let out when the last piece of a puzzle clicks into place. I was not just protecting my work. I was reclaiming my name, my future, my value. They wanted to replace me like a part in a machine. But I was not a part. I was the engine. And they were about to find out what happened when the engine walked away. I kept thinking about Elliot and Marissa, how casual their words had sounded. Like my career was just another item on their to-do list. Give her the award, then let her go. It was not even personal to them. It was strategy, control, optics. That made it worse somehow. They were not cruel because they hated me. They were cruel because they did not think I mattered. And that was going to be their biggest mistake. From that point on, I stopped seeing myself as their employee. I was done asking for permission. I was done waiting for someone to recognize my worth. I was going to make sure the world saw it, with or without them. So I stayed quiet. I smiled through the rehearsals. I nodded through the planning meetings for the gala. And all the while, I knew the trap was already set. All I had to do now was wait for them to walk into it. It started slowly, almost too subtle to notice. One morning I walked into the office expecting the usual buzz, but something was off. My calendar, once packed with high-level strategy meetings and leadership huddles, was suddenly blank. Not rescheduled, not delayed, just wiped clean. When I tried to rejoin our weekly product sync on the 12th floor, my executive keycard blinked red at the elevator panel. No access. I stood there, staring at the scanner, pretending it must have been a system error. But deep down, I already knew it was not. At first, I told myself it was temporary. Maybe it was a security update or an admin oversight. But that illusion shattered quickly. I sent messages to our team coordinator to check on my access. No response. I tried to add myself back into the meeting invites. They were locked. I emailed Elliot directly. Twice. Nothing. By Friday, I realized this was not a glitch. It was a warning, a quiet but deliberate signal that I was no longer welcome at the table I had helped build. The shift in tone was almost theatrical. People who once relied on me for guidance started acting like I did not exist. I would walk into a room and conversations would die mid-sentence. Jokes were exchanged behind my back with eyes that never met mine. The few ideas I offered during team calls were either brushed off or immediately repackaged and repeated by someone else, like they had just thought of it. I started to feel like a ghost in my own department, still breathing, still present, but somehow invisible. The one person who treated me like I still mattered was Jared Penn. He had been my friend since my second year at Valvera Tech. As director of analytics, he was sharp, steady, and had always backed my decisions, even when others hesitated. We had gone through product launches together, celebrated wins, vented about leadership politics over coffee. When everything else around me began to freeze, Jared still met me for lunch, still answered my messages, still offered a few words of quiet support, at least for a little while. Then one day he did not show up. No text, no call, just an empty table at our usual lunch spot. I waited, thinking maybe he had been pulled into a last-minute meeting. But after 3 more unanswered messages and 1 voicemail, I knew something had changed. The next morning I saw him across the lobby, speaking with Marissa near the corner windows. Her hand was on his arm. He nodded once, then looked down and walked away without seeing me. Later that week, someone from finance told me, off the record, that Jared had just been promoted to Vice President of Data Strategy. It was a new role, one that had never existed before, one that conveniently placed him directly under Marissa's leadership. The pieces fell together quickly. She had offered him the title in exchange for silence, for distance, for loyalty to the system instead of to me. It hurt in a way I was not ready for. Not because I expected him to risk everything for me, but because I had believed, truly believed, that our friendship was built on something stronger than titles and politics. I had always known corporate loyalty was transactional, but I never expected to become a transaction myself. He had chosen comfort over conscience, and while I could not entirely blame him, I would not forget it. Every day after that felt colder. People avoided my desk. Team messages went quiet when I joined. I became the cautionary tale, the one who flew too close to the sun. But they had no idea what I was building behind the scenes. They had no idea that while they were cutting me off, I was cutting them out, piece by piece, quietly, with precision. What they mistook for isolation was actually preparation. And what they thought was silence was just the sound of the storm building. Because if they thought this was the end of my story, they had not been paying attention. I was not gone. I was just getting started. It happened on a Monday morning, the kind of quiet morning when the office still smells like fresh coffee, and the lights above your desk hum a little louder than usual. I came in early, hoping to get a head start on reviewing final integration plans for the telecom rollout. The building was nearly empty, except for a few interns dragging their feet toward the kitchen. I sat down, opened my laptop, and refreshed my inbox. And there it was, an email with the subject line, "For final review, Linford termination packet." I froze. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe it was a phishing scam or some strange internal glitch. But curiosity pushed me to click. It had come from Marissa's executive assistant, copied to Elliot, and flagged for urgent review. The attachment was a 5-page PDF, clearly not meant for my eyes. But in that moment, none of that mattered. I opened it without hesitation. And what I read made my hands shake. It was cold, clinical, not even a full paragraph about my contributions, just language designed to justify a swift and quiet exit. The first page described me as having ongoing difficulty integrating into team culture and conflicts with emerging leadership styles. In short, I was no longer convenient, no longer easy to control. Page 2 laid out the proposed date of termination, 3 days after the gala. They planned to fire me the same week I was scheduled to accept the company's top innovation award. Page 3 outlined a prepared statement. Should I choose to exit with discretion? I laughed when I saw that phrase. Discretion was the last thing on my mind. The final page was the most damning. It showed the approval signatures. Marissa, of course, and Elliot, dated exactly 2 weeks prior. That meant the moment I shook his hand in the hallway, the moment he smiled and said, "We are all proud of you, Rachel." He had already signed off on my removal. The moment they handed me the award invitation, they already had the knife halfway in. The whole ceremony was not a celebration. It was a setup, a farewell dressed up as a standing ovation. I sat back in my chair and stared at my screen. There was a strange mix of emotions building in my chest. Not shock. I had already suspected what they were planning. But this was proof. Concrete. Final. I was not being pushed out for performance or company strategy. I was being sacrificed. Cut down because I had become too visible, too respected, too difficult to contain. I had done the impossible, and now they were erasing me for it. I thought about confronting them, marching into Elliot's office and demanding an explanation. But what would that achieve? They would deny everything. They would call it a misunderstanding. They would probably spin it into a conversation about restructuring or leadership alignment. I knew how this game worked, and I was done playing by their rules. Instead, I downloaded the file and saved it in a hidden folder. I backed it up twice just in case. That email was more than an insult. It was leverage, and if they thought I was going to go quietly, they had clearly underestimated the wrong woman. They wanted a clean break, a public thank you, and a private exit. But I had already spent weeks preparing for something much bigger than they could imagine. That day, I walked through the office with a different kind of focus. I smiled at the receptionist. I responded to messages like normal. I even nodded politely to Marissa as she passed by my desk. But behind my calm expression was a wildfire of clarity. They had declared war, and I had just read their battle plan. What they did not know was that I had my own plan, and it was already in motion. They thought I was just another name on a spreadsheet, but I was not. I was the reason this company had a future at all, and I was about to take that future with me. One quiet move at a time. When you are pushed into a corner, the first thing you realize is how small your circle really is. I had spent nearly a decade building relationships, sitting through networking events, mentoring junior staff, and covering for senior leadership. And yet, in the days after discovering my termination plan, I could count the number of people I trusted on one hand. Actually, just one finger. And even that trust had cracks in it. So I turned to someone who had every reason not to help me, someone whose name was barely spoken anymore at Valvera Tech, Cassandra Rourke. Cassandra had been the company's chief technology officer 5 years ago, long before Marissa ever stepped foot inside the building. She was brilliant, blunt, and never played the political games that came with her title, which of course made her a target. I had only worked directly under her for a short time, but I remembered everything. How she encouraged risk-taking, how she defended good ideas no matter where they came from, and how she was quietly forced out during a so-called strategic restructuring after a disagreement with the board. They replaced her with someone safer, someone who followed orders. Cassandra disappeared after that. Rumors said she had gone dark, working on something in stealth. I never forgot her. It took a full day to find a contact. One of my old colleagues from R&D had heard she was heading a firm called NovaGrid, operating somewhere in Seattle. No website, no press. But I found a number. I stared at it for a long time before calling. When she answered, her voice was the same, sharp, grounded, and 10 steps ahead of wherever the conversation was going. "Cassandra, it's Rachel Linford," I said. "I know it has been a while." There was a pause. Then she replied, "You calling me means something went very wrong, or very right. Which is it?" "Both," I said. I told her everything. Not every ugly detail, but enough for her to understand. The betrayal, the planned termination, Project Halcyon. She stayed quiet while I spoke. I could almost hear her thinking. I explained what the platform did, how it worked, and how I had separated it from Valvera Tech's systems. I told her I wanted a safe place to finish it, somewhere it could grow without politics or parasites. I offered her full transparency and technical control, if she gave me legal protection and a path forward. She asked one question. "Can you send me the architecture?" I did. I sent her the full-stack overview, a technical walkthrough, and the simulation dashboard. It took her less than 30 minutes to respond. And when she did, I will never forget her words. "Rachel, if what you are showing me is real, this could change how infrastructure deals are managed across the board." That was it. That was the green light. We made a deal. Quiet, fast, clean. She brought me into NovaGrid as a partner, not an employee. That distinction mattered. I retained ownership of the core intellectual property, while she provided resources, legal coverage, and a small team of engineers she trusted with her life. We kept everything off the radar. no press, no leaks, nothing that would tip off Valveritech. As far as the outside world was concerned, I was still a loyal employee preparing for an awards ceremony. In reality, I was transferring my life's work into a company that valued it. Every line of code, every design decision, every integration pathway, I walked Cassandra through all of it. And in return, she opened a door I thought had been slammed shut forever. She did not ask why I stayed so long at a place that had clearly turned against me. She understood. When you are a woman in tech, you learn to survive before you learn to speak up. We worked through nights and weekends. I operated like a shadow, pretending to finish deliverables at Valveritech while secretly optimizing Halcyon for its future home. Cassandra was everything I remembered. Relentless, visionary, and not interested in anything that wasted her time. With her, I was not invisible. I was necessary. By the time the gala invitation arrived in my inbox, complete with gold trim and phony congratulations, Project Halcyon had already taken its first breath inside NovaGrid's infrastructure. They had no idea, and they would not until it was far too late. They had wanted to cut me out of my own creation. Instead, I gave it a new home and a new weapon. I found an ally in the most unexpected place, a woman they discarded, just like they were planning to discard me. The difference was, we were not going to let them write our endings. Not this time. Not ever again. The night of the gala arrived like a perfectly rehearsed performance. Every detail was designed to impress. A rented ballroom in one of Chicago's most luxurious hotels, chandeliers hanging like frozen fireworks, champagne being poured by servers in white gloves. The whole space shimmered under soft golden lights, and every guest wore the carefully practiced look of corporate elegance. It was the kind of event that made outsiders believe this company was built on excellence and integrity. But I knew better. Behind the silk tablecloths and polished speeches, something much colder was unfolding. I wore red, a bold choice, maybe even defiant, but I wanted them to remember me. I had never been one to shrink myself for comfort, and I was not about to start now. As I walked into the room, heads turned. People smiled. Some offered fake congratulations. A few avoided my eyes. I took my seat near the front, right where the cameras would have a perfect angle when they called my name. My hands rested calmly in my lap, but inside, I felt something much sharper than nerves. It was resolve. I knew what was coming, and they had no idea what I had already set in motion. The ceremony moved quickly, like a show on a tight schedule. A few jokes from the host, a video montage of the company's greatest moments, then a long speech from Elliot about vision and growth. He barely looked in my direction. Then came the final award of the evening. Innovator of the Year! My name echoed through the room with rehearsed excitement. Applause followed, polite but loud. I stood up, walked onto the stage, and accepted the glass trophy with a smile I had practiced in the mirror the night before. I thanked the leadership team. I thanked my department. I even thanked the board. But every word I said was layered. I spoke of building things that last. I spoke of invisible labor, the kind that makes victories possible but rarely gets noticed. I spoke of how real innovation often begins in silence, far from the spotlight. It was not a speech. It was a warning wrapped in courtesy. A final message before the curtain fell. As I stepped off the stage, I felt her presence before I saw her. Marissa was waiting at the bottom of the steps, perfectly composed in a silver-gray suit, holding something in her hand. She leaned in, too close for the cameras to catch her words, and slipped a carefully folded envelope into my palm. "Effective immediately," she whispered with a grin. I looked at her for a full second, letting the silence settle between us. Then I nodded and said quietly, "You are going to regret this." And just like that, I turned and walked out of the ballroom without another word. I could hear the applause continuing behind me as if nothing had happened. The music swelled, the lights glowed, and the cameras kept rolling. But I was done pretending. That envelope in my hand was not the end of my career. It was the beginning of theirs unraveling. They thought they had timed everything perfectly. Fire the rising star after her shining moment. Send a message to the rest of the company. Remind everyone that power only belongs to those who sit at the top. But they forgot one simple truth. The real power does not come from the title or the trophy. It comes from the work. And that work, The platform, the system, the future they were about to bet their entire reputation on no longer belonged to them. It never truly had. By the time I reached the exit, Halcyon was already out of their reach. Every key file had been transferred, every access point locked, every legal failsafe triggered. All that remained inside Valvera Tech was a hollow shell, an empty framework that would collapse the moment they tried to use it without me. I stepped out into the night air, cool and sharp against my skin. I felt calm, not victorious yet, but certain that they had underestimated me for the last time. They gave me an award like it was a favor. They handed me a termination letter like it was a secret. But what they really gave me that night was freedom. And I planned to use it well. I was back in my apartment by 10. The city lights blinked through my windows like restless eyes. Watching, waiting. I slipped off the red dress, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a glass of whiskey. The ice cracked as it met the liquor. It was the kind of silence I had not felt in months. Quiet, but not empty. That room had witnessed many late nights, filled with spreadsheets and projections and whisper-typed lines of code. But tonight, the only thing it would witness was the end of a chapter. I sat on the edge of the couch, laptop open, Halcyon glowing on my screen like a final heartbeat. I logged in under the Valvera Tech administrative skin, one last time. The credentials still worked. No one had revoked access yet, which meant their systems were slower than they liked to pretend. Everything looked normal from their side. Dashboards, analytics feeds, partner integrations. I hovered over the command I'd written months ago. It had no label, no fanfare, just a single executable line I called the severance sequence. I took a breath, then I clicked. Halcyon flickered once, like a curtain pulling back, and then everything shifted. Every major project link instantly redirected to NovaGrid's secure servers. The code was clean, seamless, invisible from the outside. If someone checked, it would appear as if the systems were functioning normally. But the intelligence, the actual decision-making core, had left the building. It was now under Cassandra's domain, guarded by encryption levels Valvera Tech had never dreamed of. The shell they had was useless without the living core, and that core had just taken flight. Then came the second part, the compliance trigger. It was not revenge. It was protocol. One written into the clause I had slipped into the telecom agreement months ago. I opened the document, checked every detail, and watched as the automation launched. 3 separate reports were dispatched in under a minute. The first went directly to the European partner's legal counsel, outlining clear violations of licensing terms and operational integrity. The second landed with a regulatory agency that monitored international tech compliance, a place that did not take kindly to shady transitions or unreported leadership shakeups. And the third went to someone who had been waiting for a story like this, Jessica Rames, senior journalist at TechSphere Weekly. Jessica and I had met years ago at a conference in Austin. She was sharp, patient, and always hungry for what lay beneath the surface. We were not friends exactly, but we understood each other. She once told me, "The real tech stories are never about products. They're about people who pretend too well." I sent her the report with a single message. You might want to ask Valvera Tech why their flagship AI platform suddenly went dark. Check the fine print. I knew she would not sit on it. By morning, the questions would be loud and public. I leaned back and closed the laptop. My glass was still half full. I took a slow sip and let the warmth sink in. I was not smiling. This was not joy. It was something heavier. Not sadness, not guilt, just clarity. Everything they had tried to bury me under, lies, manipulation, corporate backstabbing, I had turned into leverage. I had played the long game, and now it was their move. Only they had no pieces left. They thought cutting me out would end the story. They thought stripping my badge and giving me an award on the way out would silence me. But they never understood what I had built. Halcyon was not just a tool. It was vision and memory and grit, coded into every line. And now, it belonged to someone who saw it for what it truly was. By morning, Valvera Tech would wake up to a disaster they could not spin. Their biggest deal was compromised, their internal leadership exposed, and their greatest innovation, the thing they had clapped for just hours earlier, no longer under their control. I did not need to burn the building down. All I had to do was open the windows and let the truth in. By Wednesday morning, the story was everywhere. TechSphere Weekly had published a full exposé just after dawn, complete with screenshots, legal excerpts, and quiet confirmations from anonymous sources inside Valvera Tech. Other outlets picked it up within hours: Wired, Business Cloud, and even Bloomberg. The headlines ranged from curious to brutal, but the one that stuck came from the Financial Tribune. Innovation stolen, trust lost, inside the collapse of Valvera Tech's $600 million dream. It was not just a headline, it was a death sentence. Within minutes of publication, the European partner pulled out of the deal, citing clear contractual violations and concerns regarding undisclosed personnel changes. That was the phrasing they used. What they meant was, "You lied. We are done." Valvera Tech's stock took an immediate hit. On Tuesday afternoon, it had already begun to dip as speculation swirled, but by Wednesday, it had plunged a full 38%. Investors panicked. Analysts called it a confidence crisis. Board members demanded an emergency session. But the worst blow was not financial. It was reputational. The company had always relied on an image of sleek control, progressive leadership, and ethical innovation. Now, they looked like amateurs scrambling to hide a mess that had already spilled onto every floor. The facade had cracked, and behind it was nothing but office politics, vanity, and poor decisions. Elliot and Marissa were shoved in front of cameras for a hastily arranged press conference. They stood behind a plain podium in a beige room. No graphics, no polished branding, just panic. Elliot opened with a dry statement about regrettable misunderstandings. Marissa tried to explain away the contract breach as a misalignment in communications and documentation. No one believed them. Reporters were relentless. One asked if Halcyon had ever truly been under Valvera Tech's ownership. Another demanded to know who had authorized the platform's integration with the European telecom deal. They had no real answers. Their carefully curated charm had cracked under pressure. Marissa's voice trembled once. Elliot dodged a question by pretending not to hear it. It was not just a bad look, it was a total unraveling. Then the internal emails started to leak. First came a string of messages between Elliot and the board discussing Rachel Linford's emotional unpredictability. That one stung. Not because of what it said, but because I had seen it before. Those coded terms used to strip away credibility without ever speaking plainly. Unpredictability. Team dynamics. Cultural misfit. The emails revealed what I had always suspected. They had planned my removal long before I ever received that award. They just needed a moment that would not make them look like villains. A clean break, a quiet exit. Instead, they got a scandal. I was never named in any official statement. Not once. No one dared say my name on record. But people knew. Journalists referred to me as a former senior executive. Employees posted vague but pointed tweets. Tech forums were filled with speculation, piecing together timelines and roles. Someone even posted a blurry photo of me walking out of the gala in that red dress, envelope in hand. Underneath, the caption read, "The one who walked away right before the ship sank." I stayed quiet. No interviews, no statements, no social media activity. I let the chaos speak for itself. Cassandra kept me updated. Novagrid's traffic had quadrupled in a single week. Investors were calling. Deals were forming. Halcyon, now under a new banner, was being recognized for its brilliance, on its own terms. Not as Valvera Tech's product, but as something born out of resistance, grit, and careful design. Sometimes people ask me if I felt vindicated, if watching their fall was satisfying. I never know how to answer. It was not about revenge. Not really. It was about showing the truth. About proving that erasing someone does not make their work disappear, about reminding those in power that being clever does not mean being cruel, and that sometimes the quietest exits leave the loudest echoes. Valvera Tech would survive in some form. Big companies always do, but their legacy had been altered forever, and deep down, everyone inside those glass towers knew the truth. They had built their empire on my foundation, and I had taken it back. 3 weeks after the storm at Valvera Tech, Novagrid unveiled Halcyon OS under its own banner, fully rebranded and reborn. The launch took place in a modern loft-style conference space in downtown San Francisco. Nothing like the corporate coldness I had grown used to. The air felt electric. No one was there out of obligation. People were excited. The room was filled with engineers, venture partners, early clients, and a few journalists who already knew this was going to be something different. Cassandra took the stage first. She was confident, sharp as ever, and when she introduced me as NovaGrid's new chief product officer, the crowd broke into genuine applause. My name was not buried in a footnote. It was right there on the slides, on the press release, on the product roadmap. After years of being background noise to someone else's spotlight, it felt surreal. Halcyon OS had been redesigned for scale and speed. What once lived under Valvera Tech's suffocating bureaucracy now moved with purpose. Cassandra and I had worked long hours, side by side, rebuilding the core functions while making sure everything was clean from a legal and compliance perspective. She had assembled a lean but brilliant team of engineers and business leads who actually listened when I spoke. When I presented, they took notes. When I suggested changes, they asked for more. It was not just that I had authority, it was that I had respect. The kind that is earned, not granted as a favor. Within the first month, NovaGrid signed 5 enterprise clients, 3 in telecom, 1 in logistics, and 1 in financial services. Each deal was solid, negotiated fairly, and came with none of the posturing I had dealt with for years. One of the clients even asked if we would consider customizing the Halcyon OS architecture for their global operations, something Valvera Tech would have charged millions for, and still delivered 6 months late. At NovaGrid, we got it done in 4 weeks. Clients were not just buying a product, they were buying trust in the people behind it. For the first time in my career, I saw my work speak louder than the titles around it. Cassandra pulled me aside after our 3rd client signed. We stood by the window of our small but buzzing office, coffee in hand, watching the city hum below. She said, "I did not just bring you on because of Halcyon. I brought you on because you see 10 steps ahead. That is what a company like this needs." Then she smiled and added, "Also, I am not making the same mistake Valvera Tech did." That afternoon, she offered me equity, real ownership, not stock options buried in legal jargon, a percentage of the company. I stared at the paperwork for a long time when I got home, not out of doubt, but out of something deeper. Gratitude, belonging, recognition. The day the TechSphere article came out listing the top 10 most promising AI infrastructure startups, NovaGrid was number 3. Under our logo, it read, co-founded by Cassandra Rourke and Rachel Linford, the duo behind Halcyon OS, now reshaping the backbone of intelligent enterprise systems. That was the first time my name appeared in the press alongside Cassandra's. Not behind, not below, right next to hers. People from my past started reaching out, quiet messages from former colleagues. Some congratulated me, others apologized. A few even asked if NovaGrid was hiring. I replied politely, but I kept my circle tight. The ones who mattered had stood by me or had taken a chance when they did not have to. Jared never wrote. I was not surprised. Some bridges stay burned. Life at NovaGrid was fast, sometimes chaotic, but filled with meaning. Every day brought something new, a new client challenge, a new feature idea, a new investor pitch. But what never changed was the feeling that I had stepped into the right life at last. I did not just have a title or a paycheck. I had a seat at the table I helped build. Every decision had weight. Every win had purpose. I used to think revenge would feel like a loud, fiery moment, an explosion or a headline. But it did not. It felt like this. Quiet, steady, building something better while the old world fell apart behind me. That was the real victory. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Looking back now, I do not feel anger anymore. Not the kind that burns or eats away at you. That left me long ago, sometime between the final signature on my exit papers and the first client who trusted me with their infrastructure. What I feel instead is clarity. Not satisfaction, not pride, just certainty. The kind that settles in your bones when the noise fades and you are left with the facts. I was never meant to stay small, and I was never wrong about the value I brought to the table. The only mistake I made was assuming that loyalty would be seen as strength. In corporate life, you are replaceable until you make yourself impossible to erase. Valvera Tech thought they were cutting off a liability. They did not realize they were cutting loose the engine of everything they had promised to their partners. All those late nights I spent designing Halcyon, not just the code, but the entire framework, the way it scaled, how it talked to legacy systems, how it made messy infrastructure cleaner and faster. They thought all that belonged to them. It never did. The vision was mine. The execution was mine. The future it represented was mine, too. They just held the keys for a while, and when they threw me out, they also threw away the one person who could steer it forward. I think about that sometimes when I walk into the NovaGrid office. It is not flashy, no towering glass walls or custom-designed furniture, but it is alive. The people here believe in the product because they helped build it, not because they are trying to protect a bonus. There are no whispered meetings behind closed doors, no performance reviews written like legal traps. We move fast, we adapt, and most importantly, we listen. That is how we already outpaced Valveratech's roadmap in under 6 months. They tried to bury me under a false narrative. Instead, they created their competition. A smarter one with nothing to lose. There were moments during the fallout when I thought about calling Elliot or Marissa. Not to gloat, just to ask them one question. Was it worth it? Was that envelope handed to me at the gala worth what came next? But I never did. Because that kind of revenge, the loud, dramatic movie scene kind, is not real. It does not last. It just feeds the ego. What lasts is what you build in its place. What endures is the silence that follows when your name is still being spoken, but not with pity or gossip, with respect. The journalist who first covered the regulatory breach at Valveratech followed up months later. Her piece began with a question. What happens when the person you silenced builds something louder than your entire company? I saved that article, not for the quote, but for the truth of it. They tried to erase me from their story. But now, every story they are in includes mine. Every investor who researches them sees the name NovaGrid. Every partner who hears about Halcyon asks why they lost it. My presence is a shadow they cannot shake, and I never raised my voice. I never even filed a lawsuit. I just did the work. And that is the power of quiet revenge. It is not about shouting into the void or trying to make someone feel what they made you feel. It is about refusing to let them write your ending. It is about knowing you are more than what they saw and proving it not to them, but to yourself. They say the best revenge is living well. I think the best revenge is building something so good, so solid, and so undeniable that the people who once doubted you are forced to live in its shadow. As for me, I still keep my red gala dress in the back of my closet. Not as a symbol of pain, but as a reminder of the night I stopped pretending to be part of their world. That was the night everything changed. The moment I accepted their betrayal as the beginning of my own story, not the end of theirs. They wanted a trophy. Instead, they made a rival, and I just made sure they got exactly what they deserved.